Hello second years, welcome to the nomothetic and idiographic approaches flip learning. This will be your second to last flip learning for issues and debates. As you can see here, you've done all of these things. We just have the idiographic and nomothetic to go, and then ethical implications, which is extending your knowledge of the things we've already talked about in ethics in the BPS, and also you'll be learning the term socially sensitive research. So a really quick reminder, just exactly as it says on the slide, to avoid occasional temptation. Now I know that you're very good at this, but I know it's a particularly busy time of year at the moment. But just please make sure that you make additional notes over what's written on the slides. Don't just copy down what's on the slides, even if you think, oh yeah, that makes sense, I'll remember that for future. As it says there, when you come back to revise, you'll want comprehensive notes. Very simple notes like the one on the slides will not be enough. You want to also annotate it with your own understanding as well. And also making detailed initial notes, which these are, will support your process of encoding. So hopefully you'll remember it better when you return to it to revise. Was something else I was going to say about that? I can't remember now. No, so please avoid that temptation and do make those additional notes. I try and make the videos as succinct as possible. I do understand that sometimes they can be quite long, but it's that balance of providing you with enough information to allow you to be able to extend answers while keeping it succinct, because I understand you're balancing it with two other subjects, possibly three, and other things as well. Just the example so you can see why we're doing this. You've got multiple choice questions, which I haven't copied and pasted in, although the definitions from it, the correct answers, are copied and pasted into the next slide. So I'll point out to you where the direct quotes from the mark scheme. So you could get a question as simple as, what is a nomothetic approach, and suggest one limitation, so 1 mark for the definition, 1 mark for the limitation. Or you might get an example here, explain how the researcher might develop the above investigation through taking a nomothetic approach. So they've presumably described an idiographic approach, and you've got to suggest how to extend it. So AO1, AO3 and AO2 questions there, and of course you could get the classic 16 marker as well. Okay. So the definition of an idiographic approach is studying individuals without intending to establish general laws or behaviours. So the key thing here is studying individuals and establishing without wanting to establish general laws. So the key thing, studying individuals, you cannot and they don't want to establish general laws. And the reason that's in quotes is because it came directly from the mark scheme, AQA's definition of the idiographic approach. So the key thing they're focusing on, as it says there, is understanding individuals and how they behave. So it's about unique data that is suitable for an individual, as opposed to being able to make generalised statements to everybody. The information that's collected is generally very subjective, so as I said, it's unique to the individual, it's subjective to them. It's generally qualitative data that is collected through idiographic methods. So with this one, it's called an approach, but it doesn't mean an approach like behaviourist or cognitive. It means an approach as in a way of approaching data collection, or a way of approaching studying a behaviour. So it's an actual practical approach that you would take. And so this approach, generally the way that they approach it, it collects qualitative data, and the methods that are most consistently used in the idiographic approach are case studies, because we're interested in one person's behaviour, in understanding an individual. Case studies work really well. Unstructured interviews, again, so we can explore information in a lot of detail. We've got people in front of us and we can ask questions and probe. And self-report, because we're interested in their unique and individual experiences. There's no attempt to draw comparisons to other people, because we're not interested in establishing general laws of behaviour. And the perfect example of this, which you'll know more about in a few weeks' time, is the humanist approach. So the humanist approach has an extremely idiographic it uses idiographic methods, because they're interested in studying individuals, not developing general laws for behaviours or being able to predict behaviours. Whereas the nomothetic approach, and it's in quotes so you know it's copied straight from the mark scheme, a nomothetic approach involves studying a sample in order to formulate general laws or principles of behaviour. So this one is the complete opposite of idiographic, in that it's studying a large sample of people, and the aim is to develop general laws. Idiographic, individuals, not interested in developing general laws. Nomothetic, large groups of people to formulate general laws. And when we talk about general laws, generally what we mean is theories. So we're developing, so almost every theory you've looked at is developing general laws into behaviour. So as it says there, general laws that can be applied to everybody. The data collected is generally more objective and scientific and is usually more quantitative data. So numerical data and figures. They use very empirical methods, so direct experimentation and observation, as it says there. So experiments, very much, again, the opposite of idiographic, with large samples instead of case studies, and it's keen to draw comparisons so that they can identify norms. So if you think about anything where you talk about an average, so the average IQ, that would be a norm, or any normal human behaviour. So examples would be the behaviourist approach, where they looked at large samples and conducted experiments and then generalised their findings to everybody. The cognitive approach, if you think about the memory experiments that they conduct, then they've developed a general law of the multi-store model or the working memory model, and they've applied it to all humans. And exactly the same with the biological approach. They've studied large samples of people and developed theories such as fight or flight. So that's your AO1. So with this one, these are all concepts you're already familiar with. It's just we're giving them a new umbrella term for each one of them. Okay. So the evaluation points for idiographic. A strength of the idiographic approach, because it uses things like case studies, unstructured interviews, self-reports, is you get extremely in-depth data. So you can really find out lots of detailed and high quality information about individuals, which gives us a much bigger picture, particularly maybe about a person's motivations or their feelings or experiences of a particular phenomenon. Another thing that's very useful about the idiographic approach, so it's an approach, a method, a way of collecting data, is that it can challenge and extend theories. For example, if we're talking about memory, then we had the patient of HM who extended the theory of the multi-store model by demonstrating that there are separate and distinct short-term and long-term memory stores. So it was helpful in extending that theory, allowing us to study it further. And then KF, which I'm not sure if you've come across as a patient who had an accident and their memory was damaged, they were able to hold verbal information but not visual information in their short-term memory. So that made made us extend the multi-store model to develop it further. The short-term memory is not just one homogeneous group, one homogeneous store. Exactly as the working memory model suggests, there are unique and individual stores within it. So there's clearly a verbal one and a visual one if you're thinking about the phonological loop and the visuospatial sketchpad. Okay, so the idiographic approach can be really effective for identifying flaws within a theory and then allowing us to extend that theory. However, against it, it's because they use case studies and they look at very small samples or unique individuals, they cannot generalize those results because the sample is so small. It doesn't account for individual differences, and therefore the results cannot be generalized to everybody in the target population. And the key issue with that is that means we cannot develop general laws, which is the whole point of psychology as a science, to be able to develop general laws and be able to predict and explain human behavior as a whole. The other issue with it is that it lacks scientific rigour, so the methods that they use to approach it, such as case studies, unstructured interviews and self-report, are all potentially very flawed and lack scientific rigour. They are very subjective. They allow for bias. In case studies, they allow for bias from the experimenter. Unstructured interviews, bias from the experimenter. Self-reports, they're relying on the awareness of the participants, so the methods lack validity, so we can't be confident of the accuracy of the data that we collect. Flip it on its head. Nomothetic approach develops general laws and norms, which is for example, you've got IQ that we've already mentioned, or memory, so how short the working memory model or the multi-store model, and IQ, which is incredibly useful because that does allow us to predict and understand behaviour. And if we can identify the norms of behaviour, that allows us to identify people who fall out of the norms, and therefore provide them with support and treatment. And again, general laws help us to predict who might benefit best from treatments. For example, if we can identify those with low serotonin and high dopamine, we know that they will benefit from support for OCD potentially. The nomothetic approach, or the methods they use, are very, very scientific and objective methods, such as lab studies, whereas everything's controlled and the methods are standardised, unlike the idiographic approach, where, for example, unstructured interviews aren't standardised. So this allows us to explore cause and effect more effectively with a nomothetic approach, and therefore increase our confidence in validity. However, against an issue is that, unlike the idiographic approach that uses case studies and focuses very much on the individual, the nomothetic approach really struggles with lack of detail and personal experience. So we don't have enough details and enough information to explore and really understand the motivations behind certain behaviours. We can explain how they happen, what the norms are, but we can't necessarily explain much detail about the experiences or the why of why they happen. And that would suggest that if we develop general laws, they might fall down, because for an example would be that no treatment is 100% effective, and therefore that would suggest that we're lacking details and personal experience, because we need to work out for those ones that it's not effective, why is it not effective. Okay. And then finally, this evaluation point you could almost use as a concluding evaluation point for either idiographic or nomothetic, and that's the idea of the interactionalist approach, so a mixture of idiographic and nomothetic. And if you want to talk about a particular approach that does that, the cognitive approach is a really good example with memory. So there are nomothetic approaches. They do big experiments, and they develop certain theories about capacity and duration of memory and the structure of memory, short-term and long-term memory, but they also look at individuals as well. So we've already mentioned HM and KF, who allow us to extend and explore the model further, or the theory. And then a suggestion that if we do very big nomothetic studies, we can identify the causes of behaviour more generally, and then we can extend that by doing individual research, which would allow us to develop much more individualised treatments, such as person-centred or individualised drug therapies. So again, the nomothetic approach, we know that low serotonin and high dopamine is most likely to cause OCD, but there are some individuals where it's not always appropriate for those drugs, or they're not effective. So that will be when we switch to a more idiographic approach to understand why they're not working and potentially tweak and improve any treatments that we offer. Okay, thank you very much.